I'm going to be talking about the case of Jonny Brownlee, a triathlete who completes the grand final in extreme heat conditions. So this is going to be part one, again, the case of Jonny Brownlee. So to begin, I want to show this video. This is the 2016 ITU World Triathlon Grand Final Elite Men's Finish in Cozumel. So let's begin.
Yeah, well, I've been in that position before, and
All right, so let's go back and discuss a little bit about what's going on in this video. So if we scroll all the way back here. Here we see Jonny. He appears to be in distress. His body seems to be collapsing on him. Here comes his brother Alistair, and together they are going to get to the finish line. If we take a look at Jonny's running next to his brother, it kind of looks as if he's not in complete control of his body. Possibly his muscles are beginning to fail him. If we scoot ahead by a little bit, here we go. You can see Jonny's really starting to lean from side to side. Doesn't really seem to be in complete control of his muscles, and as soon as he gets over the finish line, he collapses. Later on, we can actually see paramedics coming by. Whoops, I skipped to the next one. Well, paramedics come by and they ship him off to treat him. In any case, here's our case subject, Jonny Brownlee. So let's talk a little bit more about who we're seeing in that video. At the time of this video's filming, Jonny Brownlee was 26 years old, and he is an elite triathlete from the UK alongside his brother Alistair. In fact, Jonny was the 2012 Triathlon World Champion. So he's been training and competing in triathlons for most of his life, and he really is acclimated to triathlons, and especially doing triathlons in different climates, seeing as he frequently competes in the World Championships. Now, on this particular day, September 11th, 2016, this is the grand final in Cozumel, Mexico. Now, this race includes a 1,500 meter swim, a 40-kilometer cycle, followed by a 10-kilometer run. And this was all done in extreme heat and humidity, causing Jonny to overexert himself, leading to heat exhaustion. Now, let's talk a bit more about those extreme heat and humidity conditions. We have to talk about where this race took place on the island of Cozumel, which is shown right here. This is an island off of the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. It's actually quite close to Cancun, meaning it's very close to the equator. It has a very warm climate and a very humid climate. But there's also some interesting points to take note of the time of year that this race took place. Mainly the fact that September is the rainiest month in Cozumel. It has the highest amount of rain, with about 20 centimeters per 21 days. And it's not exactly the hottest month of the year, but it is still pretty warm. Its temperatures average between 23.6 degrees Celsius to 31.9 degrees Celsius. But the big kicker here is the relative humidity. Because September is the rainiest month of the year in Cozumel, it also has the highest relative humidity, averaging around 80% for the month, which is incredibly high. Now, a little more information about the specific day of the grand final. On September 11th, 2016, the air temperature recorded was 34 degrees Celsius, which is even higher than that average range of temperatures. And important to note, the water temperature was 29 degrees Celsius, also very warm, meaning that the competitors did not need to wear wetsuits. Now, we take these numbers, this temperature and this relative humidity, and we can actually go further with it and create an idea of the thermal stress of an environment. And we do this using a wet bulb globe temperature machine. Here we have one depicted right over here. And what this machine does is it takes 3 separate readings of an environment, and these 3 numbers are put through an equation, and a single number is calculated to represent the heat stress of a given environment. This is frequently used by the United States military to determine how much work their soldiers should be doing in different climates. The way this machine works is it has, as I mentioned, 3 thermometers. Each one measures a different aspect of the climate. We start here with the black globe. Inside of this black globe is a thermometer, and what this thermometer is measuring is the radiative heat gain, mainly from the sun. So this black bulb will heat up a lot faster than the other thermometers, and it helps to determine how much of the sun and how much of the UV rays are affecting the heat. This little box compartment is the covered thermometer, and inside of this little box here there is a strip of cloth that has been soaked in water. This helps to measure the relative humidity of an environment, and this is determined based on how much water evaporates off of that cloth. So if it's really dry outside, the cloth is going to evaporate quickly, whereas if it's really humid out, not much is going to evaporate. Our last thermometer here is our dry thermometer. This reads the ambient temperature of the area. Now, we don't actually have the information for that day from the wet bulb globe temperature machine, but there is a handy website linked right down here. This is from the United States government, and this website is really quite incredible. You put in the location, so you put in the latitude and longitude of where you want to measure, and then you input the month, giving you the time of year, and then you plug in the temperature, relative humidity, wind speed, cloud cover, and it calculates for you the WBGT based on this information. Now, of course, we don't have all of that exact information, but we do have averages and estimates for that month and that time of year for the relative humidity, wind speed, and cloud cover. So we're able to come up with a range of what it might have felt like on that day in Cozumel. So we start with our temperature. Now, because this is frequently used by the United States military, it does only use imperial as its units. So it was 93 degrees Fahrenheit out on September 11th, 2016 in Cozumel. Relative humidity could have been anywhere from 65% to 80%. These are the low and high averages for relative humidity in Cozumel in mid-September. We also have the low and the high for the wind speed. Average wind speed in Cozumel in September is around 18 miles per hour. But if we were to go back to that video from the beginning and go to the end, if you look in the background at the palm trees, they don't seem to be moving very much, if at all, leading me to believe it probably wasn't very windy on that day. But again, we can't be entirely sure, so I plugged in both the numbers for 0 miles per hour to 18 miles per hour. Another important aspect is the cloud cover. This directly affects that black globe temperature reading. And so, if we go back to that video, if you look, it seems to be quite sunny outside, but not extremely sunny. I wouldn't put it as exactly 0%, but I wouldn't put it any higher than 30% either, because again, I don't have the exact information from that day. So this is the range that I went with. After going through all of these numbers, I came up with the heat index of anywhere from 100 degrees Fahrenheit to 125 degrees Fahrenheit. That is incredibly high. It must have been absolutely brutal for those triathletes competing that day. And most of this number comes from that reading of 93 degrees Fahrenheit and that extremely high humidity. And once we got this heat index, we were also able to get our WBGT, which ranges from 87 to 91. Now, we're going to take these numbers and we're going to go over to our WBGT category work, rest, and water intake chart. This is also from the United States government website that I got the WBGT calculator from. And these are guidelines for amount of work you should be doing during certain conditions. So we'll go over here to our WBGT and we'll go down to 88 to 90 because that's smack dab in the middle of the reading that I got earlier. And this places us in the high category for that day. This is high heat risk. Now, even though Jonny is from the United Kingdom and not from Cozumel, Mexico, I am still going to place him in the acclimated category because he does frequently compete in triathlons in various weather and climate conditions. And he is an elite athlete. His body is trained to compete in all sorts of different climates. And so we're taking this information, we're going to go all the way down to the heavy work area. And according to this chart, if you're doing heavy work, well, for every 20 minutes of work that you do, you should be resting for 40 minutes. Not exactly viable to be doing in a triathlon. And you also should be consuming about a quart of water every hour. Now, I don't exactly know how much water Jonny was consuming the day of the race, probably quite high, seeing as he is a seasoned athlete, but he definitely wasn't getting in the recommended 40 minutes of rest for 20 minutes of work. And this is probably what led him to overexerting himself and leading him to heat stress and heat stroke. And so, what exactly is heat stress? Well, in part 2, we're going to be discussing the physiology of heat stress. And in order to understand heat stress and how it comes about, we have to understand heat balance and what maintaining heat balance is. So hyperthermia, or when your body becomes too hot, is when the body's heat balance is thrown off to the high side. So your average human deep body temperature is going to be around 37 degrees Celsius plus or minus 1. And this is maintained through cellular reactions, which are very inefficient. This is a lot of your metabolism and your metabolic reactions. And about 70% of cellular reaction is released as heat through the body. Now, there is a way for people to quantify heat balance and see if certain factors will cause the balance to be thrown off, and that is this equation right here. This is the heat balance equation. S stands for the body heat storage. This is your end result. It's mostly calculated through watts per meter squared, which is this little calculation right down here. A positive value at the end of this equation is gained heat, and a negative value is lost heat. The important factors are all of these in the middle. M stands for metabolic heat production. This is the heat produced in your body through cellular reactions. W subscript K stands for work. This is the external work performed by an individual. In this diagram, it's depicted by this man walking uphill, working against gravity. R stands for radiative heat exchange. This is very important. This is the transfer of thermal energy via electromagnetic waves between humans and environment. We see 3 examples of radiative heat exchange in this diagram here. Firstly, we see solar radiation being a positive heat gain to this person, and we see radiative heat loss from this person into the sky or into the atmosphere and also into the ground as well. Next up, we have conduction. Conduction is the transfer of thermal energy via direct contact of an object between human and environment, and this can be, of course, positive or negative. And so, say a positive conductive heat gain would be putting a hot water bottle on yourself, and a negative conductive heat loss would be by putting an ice pack on yourself. Here in this diagram, it's shown as this person losing heat through walking on the ground barefoot. This is conduction to the ground. Next up, K stands for convection. This is the transfer of thermal energy via contact of fluid or gas between human and environment. Here in this diagram, it is shown as heat loss by convection into the air. But this is also convective heat loss, say, if you're swimming, you would lose heat through contact with, lose or gain heat through contact with water. Now, both conductive and convective heat gain or loss are greatly dependent on the material, liquid, or gas that is being in contact with the body. Lastly, we have the negative heat loss of E, which is evaporation. Evaporation is water, the transfer of thermal energy via the evaporation of water or sweat from the skin. And this is, again, from human to environment, and this is almost always negative. Here we see evaporation from skin, and we also see evaporation through airways. We lose a lot of moisture through our breath as well. Now, evaporation is greatly affected by certain factors, mainly humidity, wind, and clothes. Now, remember the high relative humidity from earlier. This greatly affects the rate at which sweat is evaporated into the atmosphere. If the water vapor in the atmosphere is too high, it can't accept more water vapor. So instead of sweat evaporating off of your skin, it just stays there or drips off. And you don't get the same cooling effect as you would, say, if you're sweating in a dry environment where water would actively evaporate into the atmosphere. Instead, you're not getting that evaporative heat loss and you're not getting the same cooling. On the other hand, though, wind will greatly increase the rate of cooling, as the speed of air that goes over your skin will take more water off of you and will increase the rate of evaporation, which is why the wind chill chart exists, because the higher the speed of the wind, the colder the atmosphere feels. And in cold climates, wind greatly increases your chances of getting frostbite. The last important factor we're taking into account here is clothing. Clothing has a great effect on how much heat you gain or lose. Now, there is a small pocket of air between where your clothing is and where your skin is. And in this little pocket of air forms a microclimate in which it's a lot harder for moisture to be wicked away from the skin or to be evaporated. So this also hinders evaporative heat loss, which is why if you see people exercising in a humid climate, they're more likely wearing less clothes to allow for better evaporation from the skin. Now, we've learned a little bit about heat balance, but what happens when we fall into heat exhaustion, where that balance is thrown off? Well, heat stress is what occurs when external heat unbalances the heat balance equation. And a little flow chart of that is heat and exercise will lead to an increased deep body temperature. Remember, the average or ideal human deep body temperature should be around 37 degrees Celsius plus or minus 1. So this is going above and beyond that. With an increased skin temperature will lead to an increased neural input from the central and peripheral thermoreceptors to the hypothalamus. And essentially what this does is it leads to your body shutting down your muscles. The hypothalamus will send signals to switch off your muscles, and this is called volitional fatigue. And this is most likely what we were seeing early on in that video, where it appeared that Jonny was losing a bit of control of his muscles and his actions, and of course collapsing as soon as he got over the finish line, most likely meaning that his muscles had switched off by that point. And there are a few underlying causes of fatigue and exhaustion during exercise in the heat. A lot of these are contested. People aren't exactly sure of how these come about, but common uh, causes are neuromuscular impairment. This is fatigue or exhaustion that can occur due to reduced ability to activate your muscles, again, following along with volitional fatigue. Brain arousal and central drive, and this is fatigue or exhaustion due to an increased brain temperature. Cerebral blood flow. This is exhaustion may be due to reduced blood flow, so not enough blood is going to your brain, causing your brain to start shutting down. There's also neurohumoral factors, and this is fatigue or exhaustion can be altered by certain neurotransmitters, but there's insufficient evidence for this. And lastly is endotoxemia, which is fatigue or exhaustion caused by blood being directed away from the gut or away from your stomach and digestive system. And this is worsened in heat due to increased skin blood flow. Again, going back to increased skin temperature. Again, there still needs to be more research done on these, but these are the base underlying causes of fatigue or exhaustion. And so some other aspects to heat exhaustion. Part of the reason why Jonny was probably able to get as far as he was before collapsing is the concept of pace selection with hyperthermia. Now, the body is capable of adjusting exercise pace to maximize the work rate while lowering the hyperthermia risk. You usually have to train your body quite a bit for this to happen. And seeing Jonny Brownlee's history as a triathlete, I wouldn't be totally surprised if he's able to pace select to compete with hyperthermia. Now, there is a backside to this. You can actually override your safety valve, in which some individuals can select a pace that can lead to a much higher deep body temperature above the danger range. So that would be 38.7 to 39.3 degrees Celsius. And motivation can also override the safety valve as well, allowing you to go a lot further than somebody else in your same situation. Now, there are different types of exertional heat illness. Once you get to this point, after pace selection, your body temperature has risen above the danger range. Well, what happens? There are three different levels. Exertional heat cramps, which is somewhat the lowest level of heat illness. Exertional heat exhaustion, which I have highlighted because this is most likely what Jonny is experiencing in this clip. And exertional heat stroke, which is the final and most extreme form of heat illness. It's also highly dangerous. So what goes on during exertional heat exhaustion? Well, exertional heat exhaustion starts with fatigue, inability to control or continue exercise. Again, this goes back to volitional fatigue, your muscles kind of shutting down on you. Other symptoms include ataxia, dizziness, coordination problems. Now, profuse sweating, this is an interesting one. Now, you don't really see either of them sweating too much. Their hair is most definitely wet. It has not dried off from their swimming portion, most likely due to how humid it is outside. But you also don't really see a lot of sweat on his skin. This could be for a few reasons. A lot of the sweat could have been taken off in the cycling portion. If you're going fast enough, sweat can come off of your body. He could also be very dehydrated. This also can really lead you to heat exhaustion. Again, down here, it's one of those predisposing factors. But if you're dehydrated enough, you stop sweating or you don't sweat as much as you should. Other symptoms, again, include headache, nausea, vomit, diarrhea, and predisposing factors, as I mentioned, dehydration. I'm taking an educated guess that Jonny Brownlee was probably dehydrated, especially nearing the end of his race as well. And high body mass is a predisposing factor to heat exhaustion, but I don't think this really affects Jonny in this situation. And so, how do you go about treating heat stress? Again, at the very end of the video from the beginning, you could see Jonny being rushed out of there on a stretcher, and most likely he was being brought to get his heat stress treated. So, number one thing to do is stop exercising and move to a shaded area or an air-conditioned area. You really want to get out of direct sunlight, get out of the heat, and you want to stop exercising because that is going to exacerbate your symptoms of heat stress. Another important thing, removing excessive clothing. Remember from earlier from the heat balance portion, clothing really hinders your body's ability to evaporate sweat and creates a sort of microclimate which keeps your body warmer. Not exactly something you want while treating heat stress. Now, laying down with your legs above your heart, this helps promote circulation, especially if you've been on your feet or standing for a long time, and this has caused you to go into heat stress. And rehydrating, also really important. Rehydrating using chilled fluids, this will help bring down that core body temperature, and chilled saline solution can be used as well. And as we saw in the video from before, monitor status and transport to a hospital if needed. Ideally, you want to cool the deep body temperature down to 38 degrees Celsius, which is getting closer to that ideal temperature range of 37 plus or minus 1. Ways of doing this include an ice bath, which we see a gentleman doing right over here, and being in an air-conditioned area with fans as well. If you mist the body and there are fans in the area, this can simulate sweating and really helps with evaporation, which will cool off the body as well. And so some of the lessons I have learned from studying this case. I've learned a lot about the awareness of exterior conditions and how they will affect performance and health. I have a lot of history with heat stress and heat exhaustion in the past. I seem to be very prone to heat stress, and for a very long time I didn't understand exactly why it was happening to me or for what reasons. Something that I learned that really affected me was the aspect of dehydration. It seems almost like a given, like, oh, if you're dehydrated, you're more prone to heat exhaustion, but I never really understood how hydrated you have to be and how even just a little bit of dehydration, just barely being dehydrated, can really affect your body's ability to regulate internal temperature. I've also learned a lot about pacing exercise, taking frequent breaks from working in extreme heat, which is very important. I've also learned a lot about understanding body temperature regulation, something that I, as a history major, never really studied much or got into learning. Taking a physiology course, though truly just to fulfill one of my gen eds, has really, really opened my eyes to how the body works and really helped me to understand how my own body works. And I'm very, very thankful for all of the information I have learned during class time and while studying for this case as well. And this case has also reinforced my appreciation of triathletes and how hard they work. I've also learned a lot about weather conditions in this class, though I didn't put that bullet point on there, and how weather works and the different aspects of weather conditions and how they affect the human body. I have really learned a lot in this course. I've really appreciated everything I've learned, and so this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.